Strategic business influencers are really leaders that are seeking out to build kind of those high touch, yet scalable relationships that are going to accelerate trust, but also drive impact for business, profits, and mission.
Okay. Well, Paige, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
This is a great topic. It's one that, you read a lot about, and I think people struggle with. And it's like how to get the unlock and how to figure out how to move it forward for yourself. So I'm going to start with just kind of like a baseline question. And that's like, how do you help leaders recognize their potential, I guess, with strategic business influencers? And why is this so transformative?
Sure, you're exactly right. It's harder for a lot of leaders to do this for themselves.
Yeah.
A lot of leaders that we talk through, they've been through corporate branding. They've been through rebranding their company, which you are both incredibly familiar with. Is a very challenging process, an intensive process. But when they get into, okay, how do I look at myself now as a brand or an extension of the company, it starts also bringing in the personal aspect. And what we like to do is really kind of back up the trains before we even talk about the fun stuff like branding or PR or color scheme or messaging. It's really all at the end of the day, I start with one question, and it's, who do you want to be in addition to being a CEO or a founder or leader, whoever that might be? And that really starts to shape an interesting conversation, because when you're at networking events, all of us have been conditioned to have kind of that quick elevator pitch, but we all talk about our jobs. We all talk about the business, but who are we as people? Because that is why, at the end of the day, employers work with us. That's why companies hire us or clients hire you. That's why investors, if you have investors, have invested in you. It's not necessarily just because of the business. They believed you were the person to get them to that next milestone. So it's kind of backing up, recognizing that, and thinking about all the things that shape you as a human, as a leader, as a thought leader. And then from there, looking at, okay, what are the goals for the business, and what are the goals for yourself over the next year, 3, 5, and 10 years. And that gets leaders starting to think about, I want to start a new venture, or I'm going to exit in 5 to 10 years, or I'm going to go off and start a foundation, or I want to sit on boards. And you start to align, okay, this is the path that the business is going on, and this is the path that I want to go on. And we find ways to marry that in a way that they grow in alignment moving forward.
And the term strategic business influencer is something I don't want to sweep over, because it is a core vocab word in a lot of your work. And so can you just define that for us, and what does it mean?
Yes. So when a lot of leaders especially hear the word influencer, they kind of get almost grimace in them, and they're like, oh, I don't want to be an influencer. That's why I like this term so much, is it means something that a lot of people don't realize. Strategic business influencers are really leaders that are seeking out to build kind of those high touch, yet scalable relationships that are going to accelerate trust, but also drive impact for business, profits, and mission.
Okay. And when you set out with a strategic business influencer to map out what you were describing as, you have the trajectory of the business and you have your trajectory, and how do we align those? All of that work, you start to probably run into some misconceptions that people have before you even set out on that journey. You have to go to unlearn with them. What are some of the misconceptions or internal just roadblocks you see that are really common when you start out on this work with people?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest one that we face a lot of times is when we say personal brand or influencer, especially in a room full of entrepreneurs or CEOs, they're like, no, I don't.
Really?
I don't want to do that. It's something I want to be behind the company. I don't want to be the face. And I think that speaks volumes. Those are the leaders that need to be doing it the most, because they have the right heart and mission behind it that's going to make them successful. The reason why that kind of internal no happens is because they have seen others that have started to build a brand in a more, hey, look at me kind of way, where it's overly promotional. And that's the way we don't want to do it. So it's really kind of getting them to understand That's what we don't want. We agree with it. It's more of how do we build really that mission-driven thought leadership that's going to accelerate you and your business? I'd say the second challenge that comes up is once we start this process is, I don't have anything unique to say, or I don't have anything to say that somebody hasn't said before.
Yeah, I hear people say that a lot.
All the time. And it's so funny. I feel like a lot of CEOs actually have a lot of imposter syndrome that have kind of been behind the scenes for several years building their businesses. There's a study in Korn Ferry that talked about, more than half of CEOs actually face that imposter syndrome behind the scenes. So it's really looking at, yes, but they didn't have your unique story. They didn't have your experience. And being able to tell that is so much more impactful. And if you stay behind the scenes of your business, you're limiting your impact. You're limiting it to that one-to-one of the clients you're able or the employees you're able to impact on a daily basis. But if you start to take the things that you're already doing behind the scenes and start to make them more visible, then you start getting to that one-to-many strategy, and the impact and the mission grows way beyond you, and it grows way beyond the company.
Okay, you're saying a lot of things that may segue to this next question, but I saw a post on LinkedIn recently that I thought was well stated. It's obviously the counter skepticism view of what you're talking about, but someone was posting, can we please just go back to CEOs being leaders and leading their teams and just stop with all this personal branding and look at me kind of culture that we've gotten into? So how do you address that skepticism? Like, what do you say to that? Because obviously we've had, I know we're in a new world, but we've gotten to this point just fine without people needing to do this. There's been a lot of successful companies, CEOs, and teams without these personal branding efforts. So what do you say to that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And, some of that I agree with. Some of the strategy that is out there today, the content, the noise isn't impactful that, some leaders are doing. And that's those, hey, look at me kind of brands. That's not what we're wanting. Really, it's looking at what are leaders already doing that can multiply impact. So for example, a CEO that, their number one priority a lot of times is relationship building for the organization. They need to build relationships with vendors, potential investors, and high level talent acquisition that they need to bring in for their executive teams, whatever that might be. They're the ones doing that hand-to-hand combat a lot of times, or that first entry point. But if they're able to start doing it in a way that allows them to break down those initial barriers. So for example, asking people to lunch and coffee. How many times do we get that email a week? 100 times. We can't delete it fast enough.
Yeah.
But doing something like this, like an interview series, or finding ways to integrate it into content where it isn't all about you, but you are including other thoughts, other perspectives, and using your platform to magnify others. That's a way to kind of hack and look at a little bit more of a modern stance on, okay, what does it mean to really build relationships in the business landscape today in a way that it serves you and your business or other people? Another thing, that we've looked at is trust with consumers has changed significantly. Especially since COVID. There was a study, Gallup did a study in 2023, kind of the after effects of COVID and what happened with trust. Trust in institutions and corporations was at an all-time low. Edelman just released their 2024 Trust Barometer. One thing that I thought was significant about that is they were saying, okay, out of 74% of all of their respondents said that they trust people like them to the level that they trust scientists, authority figures. And so it's really all about, especially when talking to CEOs, people want to talk to people and learn from people that are willing to teach, educate, that they feel are like them.
Yeah.
More than, just these kind of top level scientists or the media. The trusted media has disintegrated quite a bit. So it's looking at how do we circumvent some of that with a smart strategy of things that, you're probably teaching your clients one-on-one or needing to get out there for prospective clients. How can you accelerate that trust a lot quicker?
Do you see skepticism change based on the generation you're working with, the age of the person you're working with?
Yes and no. I would say it's more around the heartbeat behind things. What are at the end of the day. So, for someone, and the personality too, for someone where it's very natural for them to want to produce content or want to speak to media, it's a bit of a different mind shift. It's more around, okay, how do we get the right goals and the right strategy around that? For someone who has been behind the scenes and truly have never had experience, speaking in front of people or doing any type of media, or they're just a little bit more, introverted in nature. It's more about, okay, how do we work with what you're comfortable with and what you do on a one-to-one setting to amplify that? So I would say it's less generational and more personality, maybe.
Okay. And the word influence is a key piece in all of this. We talked about the influencer and some of the reaction to that word and how you've shaped it with strategic business influencer. But the other vocab word that comes to mind is influence ID. And I'd love to hear how that fits within your philosophy and how that word helps to guide your strategy forward.
Yes. So the influence ID is really all about kind of drilling down, how do you want to be perceived as that thought leader moving forward? And really, again, it's a bit of a different process. There are some similarities as to corporate branding, but there's a lot of that to self-discovery that happens in this process as well. I like to think of this process kind of like you're building your own passport. So you think about a passport, we have to tell where we come from. That application's pretty rigorous. We have to talk about all of our previous names, all of our previous addresses. That's all listed on that application. We have to look at also, though, where we want to go and marry those two things into one passport that we get stamps on and is updated every so many years. So there's this kind of 5-step process to creating this ID for strategic business influencers. The first step is really looking at where do you come from and where do you want to go? So it's a bit of, self-discovery, reflection questions that you walk through, almost like a journaling exercise in a way. And then it becomes a goal-setting exercise where, I'm a big believer in EOS and traction. So we look at, the 10, 5, 3, and 1 year goals and kind of map them out that way. And then you get into step 2, which is what's the differentiation? And that's when we like to do almost like a 360 exercise. And we say, okay, think about 2 to 3 people who know you best. Bring in maybe 1 or 2 executives you work with closely in the business, and then someone that's a little bit more on the personal side, whether it's an EO forum member, a spouse, whoever that might be. And start asking some of the same reflection questions you asked yourself and get their perspective. And then it's all about marrying, okay, the goals that you've set out and the feedback themes that you're hearing from these interviews. Those are the points of differentiation for you. Then you get into step 3, which is a little bit more of, okay, how do we look at this and say, if there are 4 things that I could talk about all day long that felt, I had passion for, I was an expert on, and also I like talking about. Those are the things that, can be your guiding light moving forward. So we like to distill that into kind of 4 content pillars. This isn't the end all be all, but this is, again, just a guiding light to get you started. And then really the next step is looking at visuals and saying, okay, what visuals do I have to kind of show this perception of who I want people to understand for me to be? And then what do I need to get in the future to help credential that? Visuals are very powerful because they say what we don't want to say about ourselves. We don't want to have to go around and say, yes, my company is the #1 in XYZ. But if you have those award logos that you can put alongside your photo or you of a photo on stage, that's a very different view when somebody lands on that LinkedIn profile than of a photo of a cityscape. So the more you can do with photos, the quicker you can accelerate credibility and you can get to the content that is teaching and educating and delivering impact.
That's great. That's really helpful to understand the process you go through. Then I guess that needs to be refined over time, right? It's probably not set and forget it. It's like...
That's right. It's just like a passport. You have to renew it. You have to look at that. And there's, new stamps, whether it's a new award or a new stage that you've accomplished or a new board seat that you have that becomes part of that update moving forward. I also like to caution people kind of this idea on IDs. You can't put out a fake ID. That's going to be caught really quickly. I think why a lot of those brands that feel overly promotional and, hey, look at me, don't work, and people are tired of them, is because it's a lot of fake IDs out there. So just really thinking about, you have to stay authentic. If you are not someone that is good at video content, that's not something that excites you, don't do it. People are going to see you right through it. So really kind of fixating on, what are you passionate about? What do you like to do? And then from there, what are you an expert on?
Okay. Awesome. This episode of Listen Loudly is brought to you by Door Number 3, a growth marketing firm for challenger brands. Door Number 3 works with scale-up and enterprise-level brands who have a mandate to grow. We help them shift from accidental to intentional growth through performance media and brand development. If you need a growth strategy and execution partner, visit dm3austin.com or give us a call. We look forward to talking to you.
So for executives who are just now dipping their toe into thinking about their personal brand, they recognize they probably should put some energy behind it. What are the first steps you would say to them of where to start?
Absolutely. I would say the first thing is looking at their first impression online and then getting that right before you go out and do all the fun things. So a lot of leaders, as y'all probably know, maybe working with entrepreneurs and CEOs, they like to jump in and get started. But really, it's taking a step back and saying, okay, what is that first impression that is happening right now for you and your brand? Because that's not only a reflection of you, it's a reflection of your company. So we like to do just a quick Google analysis. Page 1 is what your first impression is. It's not, when you meet in person, it's not on the phone. People are Googling you before you ever step foot into a room.
True.
So really looking at, what's coming up, kind of those top 4 results especially. It's so funny when we do this with individuals, especially those that say, oh, I'm a ghost online. I don't have anything, or, this isn't for me. I don't need to worry about it. We find a lot of surprising things. We find old social media profiles set up that they forgot about. The worst is we find other people talking about them and they aren't controlling it. So whether it's reviews or recapping a speaking engagement they did or tagging them in posts and they had no idea. And so it's really looking at, okay, let's rank number 1 and 2 what you can control, which is going to be your website. So how are you listed on your corporate website? Is that the best first impression? Has it been updated? The second thing that comes up, or the first thing a lot of times, is a LinkedIn profile. That's just the way LinkedIn indexes with Google. So looking at, if you have a profile with that cityscape image or cover image that isn't even filled out, why would they hire you in your company? You don't have that perception that's accelerating trust into the company. So getting that first impression right, cleaning up all those things, taking down the blog post that you wrote 10 years ago that's still ranking on page 1, or that YouTube video that an intern talked you into filming that's in horrible lighting and do nothing for you.
There's always that one.
Yes. Doing that work before you even get into the influence RD, before you ever get into the social media, if that makes sense for you, or media campaign to bring that visibility, you want that first impression right. I had this instance where I had sat down with an executive, and we do these, what we call kind of quick executive brand audits all the time. And I sat down with her and I did this Google analysis, and what came up first was what I thought was a personal website. It was her URL, her first name, last name.com. I clicked on it. What had happened was a disgruntled employee had actually purchased her name as a URL and redirected it back to a very poor Glassdoor review. And now she has no control over that moving forward, which it's a lot of things that, I encourage her to do to try to circumvent that. But making sure that 1, you're controlling what you can control, but 2, you're also, buying up your name, from a digital standpoint, whether you plan to ever build on it or not. A personal website doesn't make sense for every leader, but you have to own it so that others don't own it moving forward.
Do you help clients with that cleanup phase, or is this just more just saying, hey, go do this? Or are you actually in there?
That's where we spend the first, I would say, 30 to 45 days.
Okay.
Is in that cleanup phase.
Yeah.
to get that right before we move on to more of that strategic influence ID phase.
What are some of, I don't know, just top of mind tools, resources, or pieces of inspiration that maybe someone could go look up just to kind of dip their toe into this and get into the right mindset?
Yes, absolutely. So to start with that cleanup phase, we actually have an assessment on our website
Okay.
that you can take just to see kind of where you're at, what areas of your brand might need attention. You can find that at zilkermedia.com. It's called the Brand Power Score.
Zilkermedia.com, the brand power score. Okay, great.
And that's a good just kind of first step into getting that going. The second step would be starting to create that influence ID. There's a template that's going to be put up on my website, Paige Velasquez Budde, .com. That'll come up about, I say, March, April, once the book is ready for pre-order, where you can download and start to work through those 5 steps that I talked about earlier to create your influence IDs. So you can do a lot of this work, especially the groundwork yourself to build that foundation. Once that foundation's built, then you can get into the content, the PR. But that's the biggest mistake that I see a lot of leaders make is they start just with the activity and then they wonder where the results are.
Do you find with the CEOs you're working with that they are being pushed by their company to do this, or are they saying, I really want to do this?
It's a little bit about some CEOs, they come to us and say, okay, I am getting ready to exit my business. And a lot of them have realized that a lot happens when you go through an exit event. There's a lot of identity loss. They're already kind of starting to think about the next venture or the next chapter. So they realize if they sell their business, almost everything they've done for the past 25 or so years goes with that. So they realize they got to start building on the front end to make that event successful for them personally too. I like to liken it to a springboard. If you start now with what you have, you can springboard versus starting from ground zero. There's also, though, a lot of clients that come to us because their team is saying, you've got to get out there to help us recruit the top talent. We've got to get out there because you're the thought leader. You're the one that is, the high level consultant. If people can see what you do at scale, we can bring in a lot more lead generation. So there's a lot of advocates typically when we start the process with the corporate marketing team or corporate marketing agency to help kind of scale a little bit more quickly their goals as well.
Okay.
Whenever someone sets out to amplify their thought leadership, you're bringing light and attention, which often comes with some criticism or, people like to comment on the amplified thought leadership that you're putting out there. And so how do you guide a thought leader through that process and some of that criticism that they might face when they set out on this journey?
Sure. That can be, absolutely one of the biggest challenges for people wanting to take the step towards more visibility, especially personally. One of the biggest things we like to look at is, thinking strategically about the message. And again, at the end of the day, what's that impact? As long as you have that guiding star, it's really looking at how do we stay above the fray in most instances to minimize controversy. But with anything, there could be comments that feel probably a little bit more personal. So when we, face that with the client, it's all about, okay, is there something from a strategic perspective that needs to be shifted? Is there something additional that needs to be commented on? Or, is this just something that we need to move forward on because we are continuing to, pursue that mission? And this is, I think any business leader has probably faced this, whether it's visible or not. You're not going to be everything to everybody. But we want to make sure that you stay, 1, true to yourself, and 2, true to the business and those opportunities. So it's something that with this process feels a lot more personal than what you see in business. So it's just a lot of that coaching of, 1, understanding if we need to get controversial or we know there's going to be some sort of implication, how do we get ahead of it? How do we talk about it in a way that you are confident with at the end of the day?
But overall, the advice I would hear, kind of reading into what you're saying too, is don't let that hold you back either, out of fear of, not moving forward because of what the critics might say. Haters are going to hate, right? Move forward in a way that's true to you. And it's par for the course as well, that this is going to happen, but
Absolutely.
still the value outweighs the potential negative
Absolutely.
kickback.
Absolutely. If you're still able to achieve that impact that you want to have at the end of every single day, it's a win and you're doing the right thing. And so, from a PR perspective, we always like to think about all angles and just know that, hey, we might come up against this, but if this is still forwarding our mission, this is the direction we need to keep going.
So great.
Well, Paige, as we wrap this up, I think we'd love to know about the book.
Sure.
You're working on a book.
Yeah.
So tell us.
Yes. So the book is called The Strategic Business Influencer.
Okay.
The subtitle is How to Build a Big Brand with a Small Budget. So it's really kind of showcasing you can do a lot of this because you're already doing it. It's more about finding the right things to build at scale. The book comes out November 25th of 2025. So coming up, it should be up for pre-order, I would say March or April, where we're not quite sure yet when it's going to hit retailers, but really excited just to kind of put everything that we've been doing on paper and really magnify the impact for leaders, especially those that are just starting to build their business, to think about this more on the front end of their business. And then for those that have maybe been doing it for several years, how to get to that next level.
Where can people learn about the book and track the release date?
So PaigeVelasquezBudde.com will have updates there.
Okay.
And then I am at Paige Velasquez on all of my social media.
Wonderful. Thank you for being with us. We were thrilled to have you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Me too. This is
Yeah.